I was born in this shithole, met the man I thought was my father, and he'd come back and beat 10 colours of shit out of her. Told him if he ever touched her again, I would kill him.
And when you said that to him, did you mean it sincerely?
I would have stabbed him to death. You know, the first time I came to Oxford, I was in handcuffs, and I wasn't going to an S&M bar. I'd have been a bloody awful man. And if I'd stood, what would have happened to Boris Johnson? The work that I do is more important than what anybody else is doing in the world.
We're speaking today to John Lord Bird of Notting Hill. John was born in a Notting Hill slum, was homeless at the age of 5, went in and out of orphanages growing up, served time in prison, discovered art, co-founded The Big Issue, and today serves in the House of Lords. Good to have you with me.
Thank you. I mean, you've just destroyed what I was going to say. So, I mean, we might as well end the interview here.
Well, hopefully we can flesh it out a little.
Yeah. All right, fill it out, yeah.
Well, take me back to the start.
I think the start is when they broke the ground of Middlesex and they turned it into an estate that was in Notting Hill. The estate was called the Westbourne Estate, which is the Paddington part of Notting Hill, Middlesex being the county. And they built these lovely houses with beautiful cornices and you know, columns and you know, architraves and ceiling roses. They built these beautiful houses. Unfortunately, the middle class, the carriage folk, didn't arrive, so they were bankrupt. The property developers were bankrupt, and they were sold for £1 in the pound, which is like 5% of their market value. And it was bought by people who then divided the houses up into rooms and little, little apartments and stuff, and stuffed the poorest of the poor in there. Well, they just said, come and live here. So you had the poorest of the poor, you know, the working poor, because there wasn't really an unworking poor then. And they stuffed it, and within a space of 10 or 20 years, it was a complete slum. The tenants did not use it well, and the landlords didn't invest in it. So the roofs started to sag and all sorts of stuff. 60 or 70 years later, I was born in this shithole, as I've called it. And it was it was a madness. It was absolute madness. And it was probably a threepenny or a sixpenny bus ride from Buckingham Palace, and probably the same to the Houses of Parliament. And it was a place of, you know, there was a communal garden that was dug up, and it had old, you know, baked beans cans and broken bottles and broken mangles. That's the thing for drying your clothes, getting water out of your clothes. And it was old mattresses, old bedsteads, and it was a complete nightmare of a place. My mum and dad had 2 rooms. They didn't have a kitchen, but they had a little cooker and all that. And the ceilings, the rooms were enormous. You know, you could put 2 floors in there. The windows were enormous. There was architrave, dado rails, you know, so you didn't injure the walls when you put your furniture in, ceiling roses. And as you walked out, there were these 2, you know, Corinthian columns. But it was a shithole. And it was extraordinary. And they had all these little pieces of kind of Greek decorations around the wall, you know, as plaster. And I was born into this place, and I was fascinated by it. The best time of my life was the first 5 years living in this slum with incredibly poor people. The place was overrun with old ladies who were all dressed in black. They looked like Greek peasants, but they weren't. They were the widows of the First World War. And they were in their 70s and 80s. and the street brought us up. So there was me and my 2 elder brothers, and then there were other children. My mother had 6 in the end. And it was the most magical of places. It made me, I would say, one of the most, and, I say this because, I'm happy to say it. I'm one of the most observant of persons. I observe things. I observe the movement of planets, but I also observe people, and I'm always curious and all that. It made me so bloody curious. And I think, and unlike my brothers who weren't curious, it actually made me, even though I probably had limited intelligence, it made me use the little that I had more than people who'd gone to art, had gone to university and had been born in, in posher circumstances.
It speaks to the power of a true homegrown community, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
That you were in this dilapidated surroundings, but it was those people on the street, so to speak, that saw you through.
Yeah. I mean, everybody was your aunt and everybody was your uncle. I remember seeing, the greatest tragedy was that you had all this poverty and people died, and somebody you would be talking to would, they've gone to join the Lord, because I was brought up as a devout Catholic, a cradle Catholic. And then somebody would go. And I remember walking along the street when I was about 3 or 4, and this old lady was walking, getting up the stairs, and she put a hand on the railings, but the railings broke and she fell down, and right in front of me, she broke her head in front of me, and all this dark blood spread all over the place. And then somebody put her in a wagon and took her to the hospital, because it was the very early days of the National Health Service, and there weren't many ambulances around. But this was an exciting place. Unfortunately, well, when I say unfortunately, I then discovered Ireland when I was 3, because we went home to my mother's place down in Cork, and I discovered the countryside. I discovered trees. I discovered cows and sheep and pigs and chickens, and that was, oh God, that was so. It was great growing up and being aware of the world. The unfortunate thing was that there was a pub called the Princess Alexandra, who, as you know, was the wife of Edward the Seventh. There was this pub, and that meant that was a lot. That's where my mum met the man I thought was my father. I found out later on he wasn't, but we'll talk about that later on. And on a Saturday night, he would get pissed as arseholes, and he'd come back and beat 10 colours of shit out of her. So that was bad news. And my older brothers would cry, and I would comfort them, even though I was 5 by that time, and they were, 8 and 7, So there was this kind of, this weird, almost kind of parish priest thing about me. And I've always been that. I kind of get involved in other people's grief. And if I see somebody lost in the street, as I did this morning, I ask them, are you looking for something? So it's that kind of, parish work, that parochial work, if you see what I mean. And so I was made by that incredible place. And it's so interesting later on. It made me a historian. So I'm a self-appointed historian. I love history, and I'm always writing it. And I've written a number of history books. None of them have seen the light of day, but one of them is being turned into a film. We haven't got a publisher yet because it's a weird book. It's called Do You Sincerely Want to Smash Capitalism and Have a Full Sex Life? And it is a weird history. It's got all sorts of pieces of history. I then discovered, when I was about 40, that the day I was born, I could find, I was born on the 30th of January 1946, I could find 20, 30, 30th of Januaries, and a number of them were of great historical significance. Anyway, so you could see that this person who is a self-promoter, I'm a self-promoter, I go around telling everybody how important I am, and the work that I do is more important than what anybody else is doing in the world, comes from this kind of wonderful, mad kind of corner of the British Empire that had many associations to some place like, somewhere in India where there was rubbish everywhere.
Was it the abuse of this man which led to you leaving this place and moving to an orphanage?
No, what happened was, he was an absolutely divine father. But, when he got a drink in him, in the end he gave up drink, but he still remained. I think the problem with him is, he ended up with 6 children, and, so it was one wage coming into the house, and he was just at the bottom of the pecking order. He was an incredible, hard-working man. He was so gentle and so kind and thoughtful, but then would lose his rag with me in particular, because I was always in trouble with the police and my mother. But when I was 18, I came out of a young offenders institute, and I gave him a kicking because he was trying to pour a kettle of hot water over my mother. And by which time he'd given up drink, so it wasn't the drink. And I told him if he ever touched her again, I would kill him. And he never touched her again. And she lived for another 11 years. And they fell in love. And it was beautiful to see them. So in a way, it was like, on many occasions, if you call a bully out.
Yes.
When they have to realize that actually they can't sort out their own problems by taking it out on somebody else.
And when you said that to him, did you mean it sincerely?
I would have stabbed him to death. My mother, who was a wonderful human being, but also, unfortunately, she was brought up, she didn't like black people, she didn't like Jewish people, she didn't like anybody. But, in the end, when she died at the age of 52 of cancer, she was in a hospital surrounded by Jamaican nurses. She had 2 Jewish doctors trying to keep her alive. And she kind of, in a way, and it was great to see it, when I said, Mum, what do you feel about this? She said, they're wonderful. They're absolutely fucking wonderful. So in the end,
yes.
she kind of, and like a lot of people who say they're racist, they still have black friends or Jewish friends or, people from Arabia or somewhere like that. And so she was a bit of a contradiction. But, and she was very violent as well, I had to go to hospital once because she was drying up some knives, and I said to my brother, my mother would always say, go easy with the butter, because we had butter one day a week, and other days we had marge. And I said to my brother, go easy with the marge, in an Irish accent. I said, go easy with the marge. And she threw these things. And I had all these cuts, and I had to go to St. Stephen's Hospital, which is now Chelsea and Westminster, down on the Fulham Road in Chelsea. And I had to and they said, how did you get all these cuts? And I said, and we hadn't planned, because they could have taken me away from her. In fact, if they'd known that she'd thrown a load of knives at me. And I said, I fell down the stairs. And they said, but these are cuts. And I said, we've just taken off the lino and we've left the nails in. So I had to invent.
Yes.
Like that. And my mother afterwards said, fuck me, that was a close one.
Wow.
Anyway, so she was.
Yeah. And so you were, correct me if I'm wrong, in and out of prison for petty theft.
Yeah, I was in and out of institutions, and then I was in a YP, young prisoner, when I was 15 and 16. And I was given things like short, sharp shocks. I was given, it was a detention centre, which is a boot camp. And what's interesting, I like to, because I'm a joker, I like to take the mickey. And I was, when I speak at the Oxford Union, which I've done on a number of occasions, I always say, you know, the first time I came to Oxford, I was in handcuffs and I wasn't going to an S&M party. I was going to Oxford Detention Centre.
So how did your experiences in prison differ from the slum? Was it better surroundings?
Well, you got
Physically, at
fed
least?
better.
Yeah.
You got fed better. You, you know, you had sheets and you had underwear. I mean, when we went to bed, I mean, I slept between two little chairs which divided in the course of the night. This was when we were in the slums. And I was covered by old coats. We never had blankets and sheets. I think until I got to the age of about 18. That's when, you know, we stopped using old coats. And even when later on we'd moved to a council flat, we still would get into bed and, you know, you'd lay old coats over you. I mean, it was there was no money.
And was it at prison where you discovered art?
Well, what happened was, I mean, if I tell people what I got done for, you know, like driving cars, stealing cars, or, you know, taking and driving away without the owner's consent, they don't say stealing cars. They like to ponce it up a bit. And stealing bikes and breaking into offices and starting fires and all that stuff. Shoplifting, I was done for shoplifting, though I wasn't shoplifting because, you know, I've never been caught shoplifting. In fact, you know, if I run out of money, there's always a means of keeping my costs down because I'm quite good at shoplifting. You know, from the age of 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, I was always being disciplined at the Chelsea Juvenile Court, which laughingly was behind Harrods, of all places, in Walton Road, Walton Street, which is now as posh as arseholes.
Well, that's London in a nutshell. You're always one street away from exceptional wealth or exceptional poverty, or a place of a jurisdiction and a place of destitution.
Put beautifully.
Thank you. Tell me about this discovery of art then, or how you first started painting, etc.
When I was in detention centre, which was a 3-month short, sharp shock, where they just beat you up and all that stuff, and all the boys were fighting with each other when they got the chance. Good thing was that you got your own cell, so you got locked up at 9:15 every night and unlocked at 4:45 in the morning. So you were safe. So you didn't have, you didn't have predatory men as you did in other institutions, predatory boys who might be wanting to fiddle with you or something like that. But I used to draw we used to be in the classroom and I used to draw and I used to really like it and the boys liked it. I then left there. I got thrown out of school. The headmaster of my school, St Thomas More's School, which is now, I think, quite a posh school. It's in Cadogan Street behind Peter Jones's in Chelsea. Mr Murphy saw me in Sloane Square and said to me, "Bird, you're a rotten apple. So I want you to stay away from school so that you don't corrupt all the other boys." Because I would stand up against the teachers. If the teachers tried to hit me, I would hit them. So I took the stick off of one teacher who was going to beat me and I beat him and threw the stick away and then went out. And I would tell him to F off and this, that and the other. I was a real, pain in the rear. And so what happened was he said, will fill in the register. So the school board won't...
They think you're here.
Think you're at school. And the school board could take you to court and put you away if you didn't go to school. So that was when I was 14 and a half. And then I officially became a worker in April 1961 when I was 15 and a quarter. And then I had about 8 jobs in a very, very short space of time. I then helped somebody out, a friend who had broken into his grandmother's flat when she was away in Ireland. And he'd stolen her savings card for a shop called Home and Colonial, which was very much like Sainsbury's and all that. This is before supermarkets were. There were a few of them, but there weren't many of them. And I cashed it for him, a £5. And then we had an enormous fight because he didn't want to share the money. I didn't grass him up, so he never got done, but I got done. I was described as a gypsy boy because I looked, I didn't look like other people. I had mad, dark hair, and I think I had a bit of a broken nose at the time. And they called me a Romany boy. So they were looking for this Romany boy. Then they caught me. Then I went to court, and then I wanted a jury. I said, I'm not going to, I had a choice of a jury. And so I was supposed to go to the Quarter of London Sessions at Newington Causeway. Interestingly, virtually every police station, every court I ever spent time in, they've all been sold and turned into flats or something like that. This is London for you. Anyway, so I then ran away and lived rough for a few months, slept around the West End, slept in various other places. Then I got caught, put into an institution called an approved school, which was a reformatory, which was brilliant. This was, a reconnection with the slums in the sense that it was a grand building. It was a grand Georgian mansion down in Surrey, 32 miles from London. And it was a Georgian mansion that had been built in the early 18th century. It was a phenomenal place. I ran away from there with a guy. We smashed up a car, 102 miles an hour, ended up in a boys' prison. Then eventually they sent me back to this place. And then in the evenings you had spare time, and they said, what do you want to do with your spare time? There were a number of classes. And it was based really on a public school. It was a really brilliant place to actually go to. And I said, I want to draw and paint. So they got me painting, got me paints and drawings. They got me a teacher. I mean, if I had said I wanted to climb Mount Everest, now long as I didn't go around robbing old ladies or breaking into offices, they would have done it. I mean, that is such the brilliant thing about the custodial youth offenders in those days. They didn't warehouse you like they do now. They actually said, all right, then we're going to reform you. And there, I mean, there I learned to read and write properly. Well, actually, that was in Ashford Boys Prison, when a screw gave me a book and then I underlined all the words that I didn't know. And they were all these silly little words like them, there. The words that give the sentence a meaning.
The structure,
yeah. And, got an itchy nose. And I'm not using cocaine.
Yes.
Not now. So anyway, when I went back there, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to paint and draw. And I became obsessed. And then the screws, the instructors, Mr. Milton, who drove a tractor, he gave me a copy of Lust for Life about Vincent van Gogh. Brilliant book. And I saw myself as Van Gogh Mark II. And I became peculiar. I mean, just didn't want to talk to anybody. I just wanted to do art, painting.
You kept your ear, though.
Sorry?
You kept
I
your
kept
ear.
my ear, yes.
Who were your was Van Gogh an aesthetic influence, or who else?
It was the influence of the Impressionists. I mean, I liked Gauguin most because I looked a bit like him. You know, I kind of looked like this weird nose, you know. If you ever see Gauguin's self-portrait, you've got this kind of weird nose as though someone's trodden on it.
And he was somewhat of an outsider, especially when he went to Tahiti.
Yeah. And also, you know, he was a banker. He threw all that in. His mother, I think, was from Peru. But I loved the life of the struggle of Vincent van Gogh, and I decided I would struggle and be a painter and give everything up. So I became a bit of a pain in the ass. And as I got bigger and stronger, I also had this incredible, I never saw it in anybody else in any institution. I had this incredible sense of justice. So I would stop boys beating up younger boys, even though that was the tradition, you know, kind of fagging system. And I would jump on people and beat them up if they beat up somebody who was younger. That's what happened to me. I got beaten up the moment they beat you up and beat you up and beat you up, and then you'd end up beating other people up. And I just couldn't handle it. And I was a devout Catholic at the time. I mean, I was going to church and going to Holy Communion and confession, and I was going to be a painter that was also a good Catholic.
Yes.
And this moral imperative on my part to defend people. Unfortunately, I defended a couple of geezers, and then I had to go to hospital because I had my nose broken when I was there, and it was the second time. So I had to go and have my nose rebuilt. And I was always having things done to my nose. And I had to go to hospital, and I came back, and the two guys I'd protected we sat on a table of 8, and you had the head boy and the second head boy, and then they used to serve out the food. You'd get them in these pans, and the two boys I'd helped and protected had shortchanged everybody to make sure they had the biggest meals, you know, and I went nuts and I hit them in the dining room. Then I got caned and I lost kind of a few months, I think, remission. So I was a really weird boy, you know. I was trying to change the world from one reformatory, you know. So, and I don't like bullies, even though myself, I've been a bully, you know. And I mean, in the sense that I've had 5 children, and, you know, you end up kind of pushing them around. And
there are uncanny kind of moral and personality similarities between you and someone who sat in that chair a few months ago, Baroness Claire Fox, who also spoke of this intrinsic, she still has it today, she's only 5 foot tall, but she has this intrinsic dislike, this visceral hatred of bullies. And it's funny seeing that those similar personality traits, and then seeing your trajectories both come from relatively poor kind of Irish migrant families, and then landing in the House of Lords. Was there a time post-school, post-institutions, where you had a semblance of normality about your life, where you had let's say a 9 to 5, the art business got going, you had something which felt more stable?
I mean, I was a butcher's boy when I was 14, and I used to be a butcher's boy for the Queen's Butchers, which was in Knightsbridge, called Cobb & Co. In fact, when Prince Charles, as he was then, opened our building, the Big Issue building in Farringdon, I said to him, I used to deliver meat to your mother, And I suddenly realised that could be misinterpreted in a rude way, and I thought he might throw his arms around me and say, "Daddy." But anyway, so I was working. I used to deliver paraffin at the age of 10 around Earl's Court, and I was delivering, meat when I was 10 and 11 in Fulham, and I was doing fruit and veg around Kensington High Street, and then I had all these jobs. So I had a lot of jobs, but I mean, some jobs only lasted a few hours because they realised I was a right pain in the arse. And then I would, if I was ever near a till, that was a disaster for the business. I got thrown out of a job. My first job was working for Thomas Crapper, which made toilets and, bathroom utensils. And that was on the King's Road, Chelsea. You'd never believe that on the King's Road, Chelsea was a little factory and a warehouse, and I worked there. And they got rid of me because my job was to go to the post office and post all the mail. And I put it in the bin and spent the money in the Chelsea dining rooms having a lavish lunch. And all that stuff, and then this Jamaican road sweeper brought all these things, all these letters, and he said, "I keep seeing these in my bin." And I couldn't explain it. I was outraged that they sacked me because I thought after 2 weeks they'd give me a pay rise. So I had kind of, and yet I was a Catholic going to church and.
And how did the big issue come about?
I was painting and drawing, and I had this enormous portfolio, absolutely enormous. And, I had to carry it around. And when I came out, and I met a young woman when I was almost 18. I came out when I was nearly 18. And I met a young woman. I was, I've always been interested in women and their underwear. Because, when you're 17 or 18 and you've been banged up, you're kind of like a bit of chemistry going wrong there. And I saw this art student in the British Museum, and she was sitting there with her legs akimbo, and I thought, oh my God. So I blessed myself, and I went over and talked to her, and we became friends, and she looked at my artwork because I was there painting and she was there painting. And then she was at Chelsea School of Art, and she said, "You ought to go in and go to the night drawing classes between 6 and 9. You look like an art student. No one will take you for it." So I went in, and religiously every night from Monday to Friday, I would be in Chelsea School of Art. And then when I was there for about 3 or 4 months, I said to one of the teachers, instructors, Monsieur Villard, who was a wonderful painter, a Frenchman, and I said, "Do you think I should become an art student?" And he said, "I thought you were an art student." I said, So the next day I went to the office and applied, and had the most wonderful experience. One of the most wonderful. So they put me on the list. I penciled me in because they'd already decided. They typed up the list and they put me on the bottom of the list. And then on the Friday, I went for the interview, and there were about 10 girls, all dressed in black, all with their black purchased portfolios, quite thin. And what happened, you would hand your portfolio in, and then 10 minutes later, they'd call you in. And then you'd go in and you'd have an interview. And I was the last. So it was these 10 girls all dressed like witches. Then they took my portfolio in, and 10 minutes later, nothing. I'm the last one. Nothing. 20 minutes, nothing. Half an hour. And I thought, fuck me, the bastards are fucking, I'm going to go in there and kick their fucking, and after about 40 minutes, and I walked in, and there was this enormous room. It was in the Regent Street Poly, which I think now is a part of the West London I don't know what university. Anyway, this enormous room, and everywhere they'd put up, I saw that I've never seen.
Wow.
It was, and then they asked me what I did, and I said, well, at the time I was a labourer for the Royal Borough of Kensington in their Parks Department, and so the chap, Patrick Simons, was a very well-spoken man, said, so, boy, he called me boy. I said, boy, because I did look like a boy. I mean, my trousers were I looked like a hillbilly because my trousers were too short, and they were the only posh trousers I had. And I used to cut my own hair. So
you'd fit in perfectly with art students today. At this
yes,
kind of
I mean,
places.
I'd be very stylish. And he said, boy, so what do you do? And I said, I work for the Royal Borough of Kensington in the Gardens Department. He says, and he pointed to a little window, a windowsill, and he pointed it, and he said, what's that plant there? And I looked at it, and I said, well, to you, sir, that's a geranium, but to me, it's a zonal pelargonium. And he went, I was in.
Yeah.
And the reason I knew it was a zonal pelargonium is because when I was banged up in Pepper Harrow, Park House School down in Surrey, in order to progress in the gardening department where I was placed, you had to go into the glass house. And you had to know the Latin names of. I mean, it's brilliant. I mean, why don't they do this now? Why don't they teach Latin to the underclasses? Yeah. Anyway, so I would know Aphelandria squarosa Louisa, Sabrina pendula, Chlorophytum capense, and and I knew hundreds of names of plants. And Patrick Simons was a gardener, so he knew. And we, and I got a letter the next day, you are in at Chelsea School of Art. So I went into Chelsea School of Art, rather full of myself. And then I was drawing, and I'd been drawing all over the summer, and I was much better than anybody else in the class. I mean, I was far superior, and the teachers recognized that. And when they, when they critiqued people's work, they would always say, look at that, and I was painting like Cézanne at the time. But unfortunately, I was having relationships with girls, art students and other people. And then I met a young girl in a lift on Gloucester Road tube station. And then I was engaged to a very, very posh young lady who loved me because I reminded her of the boy Napoleon. And in her room, she had all these little pictures of Napoleon Bonaparte. I was a kind of 18-year-old version, young Bonaparte, Anyway, so what happened was we were engaged, but we didn't tell anybody. And at a Christmas party, I hadn't eaten really for a few days, and because I was homeless as well, I got kicked out of my mum's house, and then I wouldn't go back. Anyway, so I was at her party, and then she had this beautiful pink dress, and she was a very well endowed young lady, and I just walked up to her like this. And she says, Tony, I was Tony Bird at the time. She said, Tony, you don't look... And I went, yeah, and puked all over her, filled up her cleavage, and that was the end of the relationship.
This is where the similarities between your interview and Claire Fox's interview start to differ.
Oh, yes, probably.
She never told such a story.
Yeah. So anyway, then what happened was I was on a sofa in Putney or something, and they dropped me back there, and I was sick everywhere and all that stuff. And then I noticed I only had one shoe.
Cinderella.
So I had to go back to Christiane's house to find the shoe. So when I knocked on the door, her mum said, fuck off. So I fucked off. She lived in Kensington High Street, and I wandered around. And then I was down near Gloucester, and I thought, there was that Scottish girl I met on the train in the lift the other day. She lives around here. So I knocked on her door, and she came down. And 9 months later, she became pregnant. And 9 months later, I got married in Our Lady of Victories on Kensington High Street.
And she wasn't put off by your appearance that evening, post throwing up on another girl and wandering the streets with one shoe?
The other thing was I was a bit of a liar. So I told her my name was Jonathan de la Rue, and I was a part of the de la Rue family. And the de la Rue family, I only knew about them because they used to print luncheon vouchers, which people gave you, and they also print banknotes. So I told her I was posh as arseholes. And even though I didn't speak posh, and I just told her I was the black sheep of the family. And then after a few months, I told her, actually, I come from a block of council flats in Fulham, and my mum's a cleaner and my dad's a labourer.
How did she take that news?
She took it all right, but we would not have been together if it wasn't for the fact that she became pregnant. And then we got married. We moved up to Edinburgh to have the baby. Then it very quickly fell to pieces. She went back to her parents, and I then got into more trouble with the police. And the long and the short of it, you were asking me how the big issue started. I went up to see her when I was 21, and I'd just become a Marxist, Engelist, Leninist, Trotskyist when I ran away from the police in London to Paris, and I had a haute bourgeois Marxist, Engelist, Leninist, Trotskyist girlfriend who was at the Sorbonne, and she got rid of all my racism. So I would say, there's too many blacks or too many Jews or whatever, too many Indians, and you piece of shit. She boom, 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 boom. And within a matter of months, I'd become an international Marxist. And I went up to Edinburgh and to see my wife and my daughter. And my lovely wife said, she still called me Jonathan, even though I was Tony Bird. And she said, oh, Jonathan, I called, because she lived outside Edinburgh with her parents. I said, can I come in? And she says, you can't come in. No. She says, I've got some money. I'll give you some money as long as you stay away. So she gave me 30 quid, which was an enormous amount of money. It was like 3 weeks' wages. And I said, how long do I have to stay away? And she says, to the end of the century. That was 1967. She was really telling me to go away. And I worked it out. It was probably, £1 a year or something like that.
Did you ever go back at the Millennium?
Oh, no. I mean, she wouldn't. I was not allowed to see my daughter. That was my upsetting thing. But I did re-meet her when she was 14, when she was a Thatcherite. And I persuaded her to become a lefty, because I was a lefty at the time. And then she went through punkism and gothism, and now she's a librarian happily married in Scotland.
Wow.
And she's 59, because I was 20 19, 20, when she was born.
And so was some of that money...
So anyway,
go on.
Then I was up in Edinburgh, and I went into Paddy's Bar, and I met all these people, and I became a part of the underclass. I was a specialist in putting bricks through windows of antique shops. And I had somebody, a fence, so I lived by that. And I also used to do gas meters, break open in the bathrooms. There was always a communal bathroom in these bedsits, and I'd break open the lock using a stair rod. If you do it quick enough, it forgets it's a stair rod and it thinks it's a piece of steel. Boom. And then I lived comfortably. I had a girlfriend, couple of girlfriends. And then one night I met Gordon Ruddick, and he had just been, he'd been to, he was one of those Scotsmen, got a slightly Scottish accent, but English. He went to public school. And he was in the Paddy's Bar on Rose Street, and I was with all my poison dwarfs, as they call themselves, these little Scottish people who were selling drugs, and we were mates. I mean, and so these 4 or 5 posh people came in their sheepskin jackets and started taking the piss out of us, and I went over and fucking threatened to kick their fucking heads in, And Gordon and I then became friends miraculously. When I said, "What do you do?" and he says, "I write bad poetry." I said, "So do I." He said, "Mine's worse than yours." I said, "Oh, fuck off." I said, "You see my poetry? It's absolute shit." Anyway, so we became mates. And we were mates for maybe a year. And then he moved to Littlehampton. I moved back to London, and I would go and see him. And then I didn't see him for 20 years. Then I saw him on the telly. And he had launched a condom business with Richard Branson. His wife, Anita, became the founder of the Body Shop. So the Body Shop put the money into creating the Big Issue. The condom company was called Mates. And I asked somebody who used them, this young woman, I said, she had a bag full of them. She said, "Oh, yes." She said they're condoms for people who don't like sex. So I don't think Mates exists anymore, but that's how I met them. I saw him on the telly, then I rang him up. We became mates again. He was in New York. He saw a street paper being sold in 1990. There were 6,000 people sleeping rough in the centre of London, in Lincoln's Inn Field, around by Waterloo Bridge, Cardboard City, or whatever you call it. And Gordon said, eventually, after trying to get other people to do a street paper, he wanted a street paper for London because he'd seen and bought a copy of the street paper in New York.
Wow.
And well, that's just history. Anyway, that was 34 years ago, nearly 35.
And how did you go about deciding on the editorial content? How did you know what you were going to put in the Big Issue?
Didn't really. We didn't. I mean, if you look at the Big Issue, the first issue, it was a big A3 magazine. I mean, I came up with the title, The Big Issue, because I have these weird dreams and things happen. I solve problems often in a dream. And my big issue in 1991 was we were launching in a month and we didn't have a title. And then I had this dream, and in it, The Big Issue came. And then I called it The Big Issue. I met the arts editor. She was a waitress in a cafe in Richmond, and I gave her a job largely because she used to give me free coffees, and she was just buoyant, and I could tell. And she was like 18, and she was going to be going to the university or whatever. Anyway, and then she had a mate, so the two of them would go around interviewing people. Then there was a 17-year-old guy called Oliver who just graduated from Pangbourne College, which is a naval college on the Thames. And he spoke, though he was 17, he spoke as though he was about 50. And he came in and he had this kind of weird middle-class hair, which was all over the place. And I interviewed him in the pub. And as I was interviewing him, there were people behind going, too middle class. And I thought, fuck you. I'm not going to start something on the basis of some prejudice. So I gave him a job. he turned out to be the best journalist, one of the best I've ever worked with. He took to it like, shit to a blanket, he stuck at it. He was absolutely gorgeous. And then he went on, and I think he's been in films or whatever ever since and all that.
I have two case studies that kind of represent the immense appeal of the big issue in my life.
Yeah.
Would be my grandma and a close friend from my undergraduate degree, who both bought the big issue for the same reason, but also very different reasons. My grandma would struggle in a shop to decide between the 100 newspapers on offer. But whereas if she saw the big issue sell, it was a very easy decision to make. There's an immediate moral good being done here. This is going to bring more money to them. And then it takes care of her reading decisions. I'm going to read whatever's in here.
Yeah.
My friend at university, I'll keep him nameless, didn't care. Maybe he was being snobbish. Who knows? He didn't care for the content at all. But he would buy sometimes multiple big issues on the same day. Because if there were multiple sellers on different ends of the street, he would both buy one, and within 30 seconds, he'd find the nearest bin and he'd put it in the bin. And I'd say to him, aren't you going to read it? And for him, it was the act of giving was so much more important than reading what was in it. Whereas for my grandma, it would sustain her interest for a few days or the next week.
Yeah. I mean, once somebody's bought the paper, it's entirely up to them. We had one of the early advertisements for the big issue, which was made by a very big company called Steel Price Lintus, which then became a part of a bigger organisation. And they had it. They had one of the films that were put out in cinemas and all that. They had this bloke going and buying the big issue and looking at it very quickly, and then going to his bird cage and using it in his canary cage, so the birds could shit on it.
Yeah,
and quite a number of people were upset by that, but I loved it.
That's true of any journalism, though, whether it's a magazine or the front page of the Telegraph. Come tomorrow, someone's probably using it to wrap their fish and chips.
Yeah.
Or as a litter tray.
I'm not a businessman. I've been running a business for 34 years, and the big issue is run that length of time. I'm not a businessman. I'm not even grown up in many ways. I'm an artist, a painter. I paint still, and I draw, and I write books, and I write. I've just finished a book on Jane Austen. I've taken two characters out of Pride and Prejudice, and I've made them the stars of the main protagonists of a novella, kind of like 40,000 words. It's called Dirty Austen, and I'm putting in things that are not in Pride and Prejudice. I mean, I love Jane Austen. I love everything about her, but actually, if you read the books, that's one experience. But actually, most people watch Jane Austen. If you read the books...
Sat in that chair a month ago was Adrian Lucas, who starred in the 1995 BBC series of Pride and Prejudice. And he spoke of the...
What was his name?
Adrian Lucas. He spoke of how that series, whereas maybe only a smaller percentage of the population will read the book, that series its popularity has never dwindled. And each Christmas it seems to get a new audience.
I had a very upper class mother-in-law because my second wife. So I married a bank teller's daughter. That was my first wife. Then I married a member of the upper middle classes. And then I married my third wife. Her father was a bus driver, so I've kind of gone up and then down.
And your third wife has one of the most fantastic titles now,
Lady Bird.
Lady Bird.
Yeah, but so what happened? My mother-in-law was always saying to me, John, you really, really got to read Jane Austen. It'll fill the holes in your education. and all that stuff. And I tried it and couldn't get it. But then about 5 years ago, I got a copy and I just couldn't put it down. So I read all the books. And then on my 79th birthday, I'm coming up to my 80th in next week. In my 79th birthday, I fell off a stage while doing a fireman's lift and hurt my hip, and then was laid up and going to bed early because I couldn't walk properly. And the NHS were giving me exercises without finding out what was wrong, which seemed a bit arsey-versey. So I was laid up and I started watching old BBC films on, iPlayer. And I watched The Pride and Prejudice 1995. I was riveted. And I watched it, the whole series.
Mr. Wickham. That's who he was.
He was Mr. Wickham.
He was Mr. Wickham.
A very interesting guy. I'd love to meet him. So anyway, so I watched it. I watched the whole, like in 2 days. Then I watched it again. I watched it 3 or 4 times. And then one morning I woke up, because I always get up early, about 5 a.m, and I write. And I just found myself writing Dirty Austen. And I take 2 characters. I take Charlotte Lucas, who marries Mr. Collins, who is rejected by Elizabeth Bennet because he's unctuous. He's her first cousin. He's an unctuous cleric, and he's kind of arse-licking, toadying sort of man. So she marries him because she doesn't want to be on the shelf, and I've made them the 2 main characters. And I'm giving the final, maybe I shouldn't say it, but the Wickham becomes the hero of my novel and Darcy becomes the arsehole. So I reversed the positions.
I'll let Adrian know.
Yeah, let Adrian know. Just say if I was making the film again, he would have the lead part or one of the lead parts. Anyway, so I'm always writing and all that stuff, and I write.
You said you're not a businessman, though since launching The Big Issue, you received a huge number of awards for entrepreneurialism and honorary degrees and the rest of it.
Yeah.
For the way
from Plymouth as well.
Exactly. So you've changed the face of British streets, but you also nearly, I guess, changed the face of British politics in a big way when the Conservative Party approached you to be their candidate for London Mayor, which you turned down, which Boris Johnson then took up. I wondered whether you could tell me about that. How close you came to saying yes.
Well, I would have said yes. David Cameron, the last thing on earth he wanted was Boris Johnson. And Boris was, please me. And so he asked people like Greg Dyke, who used to run the BBC. No, he didn't run the BBC. I think he became something in the BBC. Greg Dyke, I think. Oh, yes, he did run the BBC. He asked, quite a number of people, and everybody said no. And then he asked me, and I'd been doing stuff with David Cameron. He wasn't the Prime Minister at the time, and I'd been doing stuff around creating green jobs, and he was going to get us a load of green jobs. And I loved this idea. I could train up hundreds of homeless people, ex-homeless people, and give them green jobs, which would be highly paid, like lagging in roofs and all that stuff, and landscaping and all that. But it didn't happen because austerity took over. So I was getting on with Cameron, and we liked each other, and then through an emissary, that I was asked if I would stand for the mayor. And I said to the emissary, I said, would I have to join the Conservative Party because I'm not a Conservative? I've always voted Labour, but I'm not really in the Labour Party. I don't really like any of them, but I couldn't be a Conservative. And I was told, no problem. So I said, all right, then I'll be. And there are all these Tories who I knew. They'd all heard on the grapevine, and they were all ringing, hello, John, can you come and open our bloody, Conservative Association in Barnet or somewhere like that? We're having a raffle or something like that, jumble sale. And I was just keeping stumm, quiet. And then Lord Maud, who was then Francis Maud, I think, or one of the Mauds, he was the chairman of the Conservative Party, and either he said it or somebody told me I would have to join the Conservative Party. And then I called a press conference on Monday in the HMS President on the Thames. I had loads of press, and I was announcing whether I was going to stand or not. And over the weekend, Boris Johnson was shitting the proverbial brick. And I know this because his sister, Rachel, used to write for The Big Issue. And I met her sometime later, and she said, you don't know what you put Boris through that weekend. He was walking around because his career as an MP wasn't going anywhere. And, he needed a bigger stage. And I was the impediment to that. And if I'd stood, then what would have happened to Boris Johnson?
Does part of you regret not standing?
I'd have been a bloody awful mayor. But when I say that, I don't think many people have done a good job of it. I don't know how good Boris was when he was. I saw him being interviewed with Ken Livingstone, and it was so obvious, the difference between Ken Livingstone, who was like a speak your weight machine, and this funny, irreverent, and quite
comedic,
attractive human being.
Talismanic.
Yeah.
Yes.
I said, I think Boris is going to win. And 2 weeks after, I'd never met him. I knew his father, Stanley. 2 weeks after, we were on the same program, and we met in the green room, and he came up and he put his arms around me and said, thank you for the job. And I said, good. I said, but don't forget about the homeless. And he said, I won't. And he did a few things. I mean, I can't quite remember. We've still got homelessness with us. Anyway, yes, so I could have upset the political apple cart. Maybe we would still be in Europe because Boris was an opportunist, and that's what politics is about.
He wrote 2 columns on EU membership.
Yeah, I mean, he was pro Europe, and then he changed his mind because Cameron was anti. And of course, I think he was as surprised as anybody that they won. Anyway, so politics might have been a bit different if I'd stood. I couldn't have done a good job, but I think because I'm not a politician will say, I'm doing a good job before anything. And I am the best person to do this job. I couldn't put up with that bullshit. I would say, I'm going to have a go, but if I haven't got the right people, if I haven't got talent, if I can't bring the people forward.
Yes.
I mean, a good leader should be somebody who liberates the skills and abilities of other people. And I think I did it in The Big Issue. We do have a problem now with The Big Issue because the public are giving money to the vendors but not taking the paper. They're saying, sell it to someone else. So on average, of 20 people who give money to the vendor, only 1 takes the paper.
Right, okay.
So our sales so 2026 is the toughest year that The Big Issue has ever had.
So as you're entering your 80th year, is that the big issue in your life, so to speak?
Yeah,
now?
in fact, I say when people say, how old is the big issue? I said, it's coming up for its 80th birthday. Because if I didn't have all of that madness, early madness, which as I've described to you, I loved. And I'm in exile from Notting Hill. So when I became Lord Bird, I could have been Lord Bird of Fulham Broadway because I live there. I could have been Lord Bird of Bristol, which I lived in for a year. Or if you can prove a local association, or I could have been Lord Bird of Acton or something. But I chose Lord Bird of Notting Hill because I was born there and I lived there for 7 years of my life.
Do you think the future success of the big issue depends on some kind of change of editorial stance, different material, or different advertising?
We have to reinvent it. The editor, who's been with us for, I think, nearly 20 years, has left left ahead of the crisis that we find ourselves in. So we're going to have to reinvent it. We're going to have to invent it. So, because what I don't like, and it is about justice, I put an enormous effort into creating the big issue over many years, and with the aid of very good editorial staff and lots of guest editors and stuff like that. I wanted to produce a product that people bought. So what you had was an equality between a purchaser and a seller.
Yes.
So
it wasn't charity.
Yeah. So it wasn't a pity purchase, and nor was it a handout. It was a hand up. So I was making people work for their money. Now the public have turned them back into beggars, which is where they started 34 years ago. So we're being killed by kindness. And it's so interesting. I'm sitting in the House of Lords, and I'm talking to my fellow baronesses and barons, and some say, oh, yes, I absolutely love the big issue. I've got this favourite vendor, and yes, I don't take the paper. I don't say, fuck you, but that's what I want to say. I say, I'm very sorry that you're part of the conspiracy to destroy my business. But the reinvention, I'm convinced what we're planning will be extraordinary, and it will take us the next 3 to 6 months. Interestingly, the big issue, the magazine, is about that size, but the big issue Invest is enormous, and that is invested in the region of 600 to 700 social businesses all over the UK who owe their gestation and development to the big issue. So we've opened so many things. It's incredible. We've started papers, in Japan, in Taiwan, in Korea, South Korea, not North Korea, North America, South America. We've fathered, or whatever you like to call it, nurtured. So we've got this enormous international network, and we have this enormous social presence. The problem with the big issue is absolutely crap at promoting itself, because I think if people knew that you can't go very far in the UK where there isn't some project, some business, some social business, some charity that we have helped come into being or help them sustain themselves and develop. And so we've got a job on our hands, which is to tell the world. And I will be going around knocking on the doors of these people that we've helped and say, I want you to help us with our reinvention, and where's your checkbook?
You're doing good work. You're doing the Lord's work.
Well, unfortunately, it's always been outward. We've never really got anything back, and now it's about time that we say to people, we helped you, now you're going to have to help us, and help, because we need a reinvention kitty.
Well, I hope that this is the year that it reinvents itself, it revitalizes. Is there anything you'd like to plug? Anything else you'd like to say?
I want people to come. First of all, I want them to read Dirty Austen in book form when it's out in a month. I'm doing a roadshow. I'm in discussions with Amazon so that you can buy on, digitally. And I'm trying to get them to put me all over the place. Half of the money I make from my publication will go into the Big Issue fund, reinvention fund. People in the Big Issue want to use the word transformation. And I said, we're not running a train company here. Reinvention, isn't it wonderful? Take invention and redo it. So you have got to come and see me on my roadshow, or at best read my book and be critical. Send me your observations. I'm going to publish on the web and maybe in a book form the people who can be most informative about my hubristic attempt at writing like Jane Austen. So I want people to tell me what an arsehole I am, but with dignity and thoughtfulness. Don't just say you're an arsehole, because I know that already. What I want you to do is to be there, and if you've got anything bright to say, I'll publish it. God bless you.
Thank you. You've been the best arsehole I've spoken to.
There you are. Thank you.
Cheers.
To a fellow arsehole.